Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lore You Should Know. I am Greg Tito, and I'm joined by...
Chris Perkins.
That's you.
It's me.
I know. It's
Yay!
so great to have you here. Today, on this segment where we dive into little bits of Dungeons & Dragons lore for use in your game, or just because it's really fun to know all this stuff, we're going to talk about Wildemount, a new addition to the D&D multiverse.
Indeed, yes. The world of Exandria. Welcome to the D&D multiverse.
We're really happy to have you here,
Yes.
Matthew Mercer and all of the amazing folks who worked on this book.
Indeed. Yeah, this is actually the first official published campaign setting designed for 5th edition.
That's really true, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because with Ravnica and Acquisitions Incorporated, they were all,
Yep.
They
were
in the
around,
same vein, but they were around before.
Mm-hmm.
This is the only one that has been created actually in the entire era of 5th edition, because it was March 2015 that Critical Role debuted.
Yes.
Right, which was after this. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I like all that. All right, so in this one, we are going to talk about gods of Wildemount, the deities that are doing all of the fun things.
Mm-hmm.
Are they similar to the Forgotten Realms gods of yore, in which they have direct influence on the events of Wildemount?
They don't
Or
anymore.
Exandria? They don't anymore. All right,
No.
so kind of similar to FR in that regard.
Well, they have been very present in the distant past of Exandria. But now they're currently locked behind the Divine Gate, which is a self-imposed, well, for many of the gods, it's a self-imposed exile, in a way, from the world, so that they can no longer meddle or accidentally destroy, as they once did. And there's, in the Explorer's Guide to Wildemount book, Matt goes in deep to explain how the gods ended up putting themselves and their betrayer god foes behind this divine gate.
Okay, so they are behind an actual, I guess, metaphysical gate.
Correct. Yeah, which was all born out of an event that was calamitous to the world, where the prime, what we call the prime deities, the ones who sort of define the core ethos of the pantheon, and the betrayer gods, the ones who went bad and started to corrupt mortals of the world and do all kinds of unseemly things to the creation that the gods had made together.
Which is a common trope in our myth as well as fantasy
exactly.
myth, right?
And in actual fact, we've seen these tropes come up before in Dungeons and Dragons, because to an extent, a lot of inspiration for the pantheon came from the Dawn War deities that were created for 4th edition. There was a sort of core pantheon that included such figures as Melora and Bahamut.
The Raven Queen.
The Raven Queen, exactly. And Matt kind of took that core pantheon and kind of switched a few things around, added a few things, sort of peeled off some of the gods into a betrayer gods category and keeping the core pantheon intact. But, I mean, just
we're going through the actual proofs of the book right now.
This is one of the final proofs of the book, pre-bound. We've even got a version of the cover that we see from the printers to make sure it's color correct. But anyway.
And I mentioned that it is inspired by old myth, because it brings to mind Tolkien with the Iluvatar, and then having the fallen Melkor. And then it's also, that's reminiscent of Satan falling from the heavens, right? And I love this, that we're exploring those same themes, but in a completely new and interesting
in the earliest form of Exandria, it was sort of this proto-world that the gods and the primordials were fighting for control over. Eventually, the gods seeded the world with their creations, these mortals, and then they made the mistake of giving mortals magic, and of course, things quickly go off the rails.
They always do that. They always give us too much.
They're helpful at first, and then things kind of go sideways. But the prime deities of the world, as it stands today, are Avandra, Bahamut, Corellon, Arathis, Ioun, Kord, Melora, Moradin, Pelor, Ray, the Raven Queen, and Sehanine.
Okay.
So the only new addition to that from sort of the 4th edition Dawn War pantheon is Ray, and that was inspired by one of the characters of the show, Tasha. Ashley Johnson's character, who needed sort of a particular deity to inspire toward.
And what is this Re the deity of?
Atonement.
Atonement.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
That's a new portfolio for us.
Yeah. And it's a fine addition because none of the other gods really kind of fit that particular idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. All right, so then are they the ones that you just listed? Many D&D fans will be familiar with them.
Yes.
Are there significant differences between any of them and the ones that are portrayed here in Exandria?
Yes, they've all sort of got a slightly different skin. In fleshing them out for his campaign, Matt sort of came up with commandments that the followers of these gods follow. He also developed their sort of look and imagery a bit. So some of their symbols were modified. He found sort of new ways to express some of their core portfolio things. The commandments are really kind of interesting and fun from a hook point of view, because then if you're playing a worshiper of so-and-so, you really get a sense of what you're all about and what you should be focused on. Just to take example, the commandments of Exandria, for those who don't know, they, gods are, you can't really ascribe a gender to gods.
They're genderless.
They're kind of above gender in a way.
Yeah.
Exandria, their province is change, freedom, luck. The symbol is woman's profile embossed on a gold coin or pendant. And their commandments of Exandria are: luck favors the bold. Mm-hmm. So your fate is your own to grasp, and to do so is to have Exandria kind of behind you, watching your back. Another commandment is change is inevitable.
Oh, that's an important one.
The righteous can ensure that such change is for the better. And then finally, the other commandment of Exandria is you want to rise against tyranny. Fight for the freedom of yourself and others when you can, and inspire others to fight when they're able.
That's great.
Yeah.
Do the commandments have mechanical effects, or are these more like the bonds and flaws?
Yeah, they're like guideposts to you as a character to kind of know what your boundaries are ethically.
I like that, though, because specifically stating those out is really important for clerics and paladins, particularly because you can say as a dungeon master, you're not doing what this commandment says, so therefore you might have some consequences or give the choice to the player to make sure that they're following those commandments.
Absolutely, yes. And so Matt got to play with their depictions and these sort of elements, and also talk about things like holy days within the world of Exandria and within the continent of Wildemount, which is something which is really a good point. If you're a DM and you're trying to take something that we've created in the past but kind of make it your own, these are great creative design spaces to explore. So the Raven Queen's holy day is called the Night of Ascension, and some folks who follow Critical Role would know this.
Yes.
Celebrating her apotheosis. The actual date of her rise to divinity is unclear, but the Night of Ascension is celebrated on the 13th day of the 10th month. And what was once a night of cheery celebration of the dead in the Dwendalian Empire has become an occasion to burn effigies and decry the Kryn dynasty because of their kind of unnatural relationship to death. So there's a lot to unpack there, but it's...
Whose devotion to death that you just said there?
Sorry?
The last bit about the Kryn Empire, you're burning effigies because...
they've got a thing going on. There's a deity that I was going to get to later, but we might as well get to right now. And deity might be an odd word to ascribe to this entity or entities called the Luxon. And they're sort of represented by these beacons that are kind of a crux of season 2 of Critical Role.
Campaign 2.
But the Luxon are entities of pure sort of divine light. But what's cool about them is they enable their followers to live multiple lives. So you die, your soul gets drawn into the Luxon, and then is born in like a new baby somewhere in the world. So it's like this constant rebirth, and you retain much of the knowledge of what you were or your previous lives or aspects of your previous lives in this new form. So it is kind of more like an apotheosis than a reincarnation or a resurrection.
So that these souls will live multiple lives and have memories of multiple lives.
And so they become quite ancient
Yeah.
as a result. And the Kryn dynasty is sort of the Kryn dynasty is largely made up of dark elves. And so you have these dark elves who have experienced this apotheosis, which is called consecution, multiple times and have multiple lives to draw from. And of course, to the Raven Queen, the finality of death is a sacrosanct thing. And this is a way to circumvent that, and she doesn't like it.
And that's why the Dwendalian Empire is in opposition to Kryn?
Well, yes.
Or one of the many reasons?
One of the many reasons. The other is geographic, and we'll get to that probably in a later podcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, fascinating. The Raven Queen does seem to have taken a large amount of importance in this setting. Is that true?
Yes. Yes. I think because, for a number of reasons, death is kind of a core element of Dungeons and Dragons. Players face it almost every session. Depends
on who's the dungeon master, but yes.
Fair, yes, yes. If you're mine, every 5 minutes, if you're my player. And she's also a very striking figure and has been represented a lot in art. And she was very compelling in the first season of Critical Role because you had a character who was directly tied to the Raven Queen. And so she became more important as a consequence. As happens in most D&D campaigns, certain gods tend to rise in prominence above the others by sheer fact that a player is connected to them.
Right.
The same was true last season, and I think a lot of people really liked the mystery surrounding her and the idea of here is a god of death who is, if not benign, at least not evil.
Yeah, I think that's a really fascinating take on, because so much of Dungeons & Dragons has been about, like, if you're a god of death, you're necromantic, you're evil, blah, blah, blah. And then here is this at least positive way of thinking about the finality of death.
Exactly. And things like undeath or aberrations in the minds of Raven Queen worshippers and things like that. So there's interesting conflict. You always have undead showing up in a campaign somewhere, and if you're a Raven Queen worshipper, you got an issue with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Raven Queen was a new addition for the 4th edition Pantheon, right?
That is correct, yes.
Were you involved in the...
Yes. There was here's a bit of interesting lore. So at the dawn of 4th edition, before we released any products, we had 2 committees put together, one whose focus was on rules and the other focus on world design and sort of what the cosmology should be. And I was part of the latter group with folks like James Wyatt and Rich Baker. And we sat down upon request to create, we were asked to create a pantheon that could sort of serve as the default pantheon. And in doing so, we didn't want one as big as some of the other pantheons that had been created for earlier worlds, like the Forgotten Realms and Greyhawk, which have dozens, if not hundreds, of deities in their pantheons. So we really wanted to narrow it down as much as we could. And we either picked gods who were representative of core concepts like creation or justice, if we felt they existed, and we tried to go outside just the human spectrum. So that's how we ended up with Moradin on the list and Bahamut. Traditionally, they're worshipped by dwarves and dragons. But we were building a mythology where it didn't matter what the god was, its worshippers could be anybody. And as we were fleshing out the list, we realized there wasn't really a particularly compelling god of death who wasn't some just evil force. And James Wyatt was actually the one who concocted the Raven Queen.
Interesting.
Yes, to fill that hole and to create somebody who was a god of death who was mysterious but not evil.
And it was, fascinating for Matt Mercer, so that's why he brought it forth.
Yes.
Ended up, and then you're right.
Everybody loves ravens, right?
Yeah, no, right.
They're so weird.
And it was Liam O'Brien's character Vax, right? That was the one that was a devotee of the Raven Queen in campaign 1.
Yes.
How was that resolved for
Didn't
folks?
work out for him.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
Actually, it may have worked out perfectly for him, I think, actually.
I think the player, he was happy to see it go away. But
Vax is with who he should be.
That's fascinating. All right, so then how does the Raven Queen, other than how you mentioned, how does that pertain to campaign 2 and how the stories have been going on there?
Well, I mean, like I said, different players sort of maybe shifted Matt's focus on the gods. And I have no idea where season 2 is going, where the gods will take them. But there's
Other gods that have come to the forefront?
Yeah, there are others have like I said, Ray has come to the forefront and stuff like that. There are also I know there's allusions to some of the betrayer gods coming
Yeah, so
up.
let's talk about the betrayer gods. How do they fit into this cosmology?
So they are the betrayer gods are deities who strayed from the ideals sort of set down by the gods in the early conceptions of the world, and they embrace destructive chaos. And unlike the ones I mentioned earlier, these ones don't tend to work together very well. They pursue individual interests, and they're just evil. Different shade, like chaotic, neutral, lawful, whatever, but they're evil.
Yeah.
This lack of ability to cohere into an actual pantheon is sort of their fundamental weakness, and why the prime deities can sort of stay above them and do their best to try to prevent incursions by betrayer gods through the divine gate, and so on and so forth.
So the betrayer gods are like Cobra, in that they're always
little bit.
fighting.
Yeah. Or they're getting their worshippers, they're encouraging their worshippers to do terrible things.
Right.
And so they include such luminaries as Asmodeus, Grumpsh, Lolth, Tharizdun, Bane, Torog, who was one of the Dawn War 4th edition deities, sort of this evil force of torture that lives underground. That's sort of come up in the campaign with the Eaters of the Worm and other kinds of creepy stuff that Matt has introduced. Zahir and Vecna, who appeared at the end of last season and whose presence lingers on.
Has Vecna ascended to being a deity?
Yeah.
At this point?
Yeah. In Exandria, it is a full-on deity.
Interesting.
Yeah. And was in the 4th edition Dawn War Pantheon too, just to be clear.
Right, I do remember that. Yeah. Always nice to get an elevation.
Yeah. But I wonder what the commandments of Vecna are.
What are the commandments of Vecna?
So, as you know, Vecna, the Whispered One, thou shalt not say his name, although we've said it multiple times already.
Yes.
But we're already screwed, right?
Also, Voldemort, just to make sure we're covering all of our bases.
Yeah. So his commandments are: learn all you can and keep hidden that which you know. Reveal what pieces you must, but never the whole. Express and cultivate the evil within yourself, and in doing so, recognize it in others and exploit them for your own benefit. And finally, seed the ruin of all who worship other deities until only those who kneel before Vecna remain.
Yeesh.
Yes.
What about Torag? Since they made the one that's less familiar
yes,
to people.
the crawling king.
Crawling king.
Yes, he's this 3-armed worm-like thing that burrows through the Underdark, essentially, or the underworld, probably more properly.
Gross.
Although he is manifest in the world of Exandria in a number of ways, including this worm-like entity that spawns all sorts of badness.
Is that reminiscent of Caius and the Sons of Caius, or is
that is a fair question. So Torog was created whole cloth for 4th edition, again to sort of fill a niche in the pantheon, a sort of elder evil, a horror of the depths kind of thing. So it was not spiritually bound to Caius in any way, shape, or form, but there's definitely sort of an overlap conceptually.
Right.
But where Caius is more like the rotting corpse, the putrescence that inevitably follows death.
Yeah.
Torog is more about shackled in the darkness, torture, imprisonment, and doom.
So less about undeath and more about just, hey, by the way, you're gonna not like where you are
exactly.
right now.
You're gonna have a miserable existence and enjoy it for eternity. So its commandments are: seek and exalt places where no light touches, revel in the pain you inflict on others, and relish the pain you suffer yourself as an offering to Torog, and then imprison those who cannot resist you and drag all life into darkness.
Man,
he is not a happy dude.
Yeah,
There's something
really powerful about these commandments, I have to say, because you can read about how deities manifest and what their portfolios are all the time, but there's something about having it be this actual command in a commandment form that you really just gets at the heart of like how they're different from each other, but then how you can use it in your game.
Yeah. There is this sense in Wildemount that people know that the gods are sort of held at bay in their sort of self-imposed nature. And because of that distance, what has happened is there have naturally arisen powerful mortal creatures who have tried to stand in for gods on the world. And Matt calls them lesser idols. And they are like false idols. They're not true gods, but they are very, very powerful creatures or beings that can be fought and do have worshippers. And a lot of those are codified in this campaign setting as well. And they're all new. They're all born out of Matt's wonderfully twisted imagination.
That's pretty fantastic. So they're
yes.
like what we might have called lesser deities in the past, but they're here on the plane of the material.
Exactly. One of them who gets a lot of mention is Uk'otoa.
Uk'otoa.
And that name has popped up repeatedly in season 2. It is basically a Leviathan, the sea monster, that was worshipped by these people called the Kinau, who basically were taken with Uk'otoa because Uk'otoa destroyed their enemies. And so, all great Uk'otoa, we now kneel before you and don't eat us, please.
Now we're going to destroy a lot more people than just your enemies.
Yeah, exactly. In Uk'otoa's case, things have not gone well for it lately. It has been basically trapped under the ocean and is trying to break out, but can sort of telepathically or supernaturally reach out from beyond its confines. And there is a serious danger that it's for the DM to decide at what point this creature will resurface and become a menace to all the islands and coastlines of Wildemount. And then there are other ones. Let's see, what's one of my favorites? Let's talk about Quajoth.
Quajoth.
Yes, let's do that.
Let's do it.
The mystery, this is the worm thing I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
The mystery of whether Quajoth is a creation or the direct progeny of Torog is unknown, but the deranged gargantuan worm creature that scouted the Crawling King's advances in the Calamity was thought to have been slain in the ferocious final battles, leaving a sizable portion of its wounded body behind. A slimy fragment of Quajoth burrowed deep beneath the surface and slumbered in the cold earth under Eiselcross to recover and regrow. And just to jump ahead a little bit, there are these humans who live in the cold reaches of Eiselcross who found this worm entity in the depths of this cavern network and started to eat its flesh. Food being, relatively hard to get.
Yeah.
And
did that cause curses or
yeah, so what it does is when you eat Quajoth's flesh, Quajoth becomes inside of you and can basically talk and see through you. So you become this kind of weird puppet creature that Quajoth can use to kind of experience the world that it has left behind. And it doesn't exert its control over you all the time either. So you may be fully fine, and then you kind of black out for a while, and you suddenly realize you're in a different place and doing something different. You're like, what just happened?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah,
I do not like that.
Yeah. Isn't that just messed up?
Yeah, it is messed up because then you can, as a dungeon master, you can use that very evilly.
Yes. And of course, I always imagine Matt cackling with glee when he writes sentences like, Quajoth's recovered body resembles a monstrous muscular worm of folded bulbous skin covered in tooth-like scales, its jagged mouth surrounded by a ring of pointed teeth with a thrice-forked tongue bearing its 3 ivory eyes. Like, oh. Okay. All right. That says all kinds of wrong.
I think you're the only person, Chris Perkins, who could read that with like an audible smile on your face as you're reading it.
Yeah. Players are going to hate this, and I love that.
And I love it. Oh my God, that's fantastic. All right, well, there's tons of detail on the deities in Explorer's Guide to Wildemount. One thing that I always like to ask as we're closing out this segment is how can dungeon masters take what's in this and apply it to their home games, or if you're going to set it in an Exandria campaign?
Well, I mean, and what Matt recommends is also what I recommend is you take what you just plunder. You take it apart and keep what you want and jettison the rest. But the way I tend to work with campaign building is to first just focus on what you need. Like, you don't have to define an entire pantheon right out the gate. And you certainly don't have to tell the players what the entire pantheon is.
Yeah.
So if you need to change direction or if you want to insert something new, you can just kind of do that on the fly. So you can start off just focusing on the gods that are important to the players. If your player identifies that they want to worship a god of a particular type and you don't have that in your pantheon, you can just build one or reskin one of the ones that are here. A lot of them are so they're detailed in one sense, but they're also very broad conceptually. They have multiple hooks to them, or their portfolio is more than just one thing. And so you can kind of build off of that and say, well, Exandria isn't exactly what I need. I'm going to go maybe create a new god of change and luck, or I might pull one from another world like Timora or something and use that instead. But I'll keep the commandments because I really like that. That's just something I can give to the players, and I don't have to rethink or rewrite that.
And in some ways, that's what Matt did with this setting. Is that he took all the things that you guys had worked on for 4th edition and built it, and then changed it and modified it for his own uses, and then focused on ones that players were. I mean, exactly what you're describing. I think that's really
in my campaigns. I tend to think about the conflict that is brewing ahead in the campaign, and if I have a player who worships a god, I will often think, is there another god who will oppose that god, or whose worshippers will oppose that god? And then I'll just focus the campaign on those two gods. And I remember in some of my campaigns, I don't think my players even knew what the whole pantheon was at any given time, because we were so just focused on the gods to which they were concerned about.
Right.
And in no Forgotten Realms campaign have I ever felt the need to give players
here's the 25 gods that we're going to talk about today.
Here are the 200 gods.
Well, right,
of Faerun that you can mull over. It's just too much and wholly unnecessary.
Holy.
Holy.
Well done.
Thank you. Before we tune out, or actually, I'll save that for later.
Okay.
I got the thing for later.
Yes, we've got lots of fun stuff to show on future Lore You Should Knows, where we'll dive into a little bit more behind Exandria and Wildemount in particular, and maybe even get some insight from the creator.
Absolutely.
Excellent. If people want to ask you about anything, how could they get in touch with you?
I am on Twitter at Chris Perkins DND.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining me and talking about this, and we'll be back with some more fun lore soon.
Yay!
Yay! Sweet. So much fun. Geography of Wildemount. Coming
Geography.
up. Geography. It's different than photography.
Photography.
All right. I know you got to create a new file. You let me know when you are ready, Mr. Ryan. We got to do this one in... Do we have a...
in 10 minutes.
Bin Win Plays coming up right after?
We do, yes.
Okay. We can do this in 18 minutes.
We sure can.
All right.
We're rolling.
Rolling. Ready?
Yeah.
Welcome to another segment of Lore You Should Know. I am Greg Tito, and today I'm joined by Mr. Chris Perkins.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
Yes.
Wait.
Always.
That's what I'm saying. We're all confused. But anyway, we are going to use this segment of Lore You Should Know to dive into some more lore behind Explorer's Guide to Wildemount, coming out on March 17th. It's going to be spectacular. You, Chris, have been working with Matthew Mercer and a wonderful team of freelancers creating this product for a while now.
Yeah, a whole bunch of us have been tag teaming on this one. And it's a big, beefy, 304-page, glorious testament to Matt's imagination.
And to the inspiration of Dungeons & Dragons in general, and how you can take what is created here in this office or anywhere else as involving Dungeons & Dragons and adapt it and use it in your campaign.
Matt will be the first to tell you that he drew on a lot of inspiration from D&D and riffed on a lot of kind of old ideas to bring this new world to life.
And one of the things that I've been excited about following the Critical Role fandom is all the wealth of art, fan art, whether it's cosplay, whether it's cartography. One of my favorite people to follow on Twitter is Devin Rue because of the amazing maps that she draws.
Amazing maps, you say?
Amazing maps. Yes, we have one. It is a very detailed map of Wildemount. It is in the actual book that you can get, correct?
Yes. This is a printout. This is a printer-proof printout of it. It's actually got some of my edits on it. That's kind of cool.
Nice. Everyone's going to zoom in this is conspiracy theory.
My version of the map that I was using in the final days of the product. But yours will not have my edits on it.
Well, it will have your edits on it, but not the notes.
Well, right. It won't have my notes. It won't have my little black marker arrows all over the place.
It looks beautiful. I can't wait to delve into it.
Devin did a magnificent job. You can't see it from this distance, but it's beautiful.
And so what we're going to discuss on this segment is the geography behind Wildemount.
Yes.
And actually, you can feel free to put that up here too if you want to, so that at least you and I can refer to it.
Right.
And because it is a continent of Wildemount in the world of Exandria.
Correct. And for those who don't know, it is At least in terms of this picture, it is east of the previous continent that Matt explored, which was Tal'Dorei.
Ah, okay. So it's
Tal'Dorei. There's like a little Alaska-Russia land bridge kind of thing going on up in the top left-hand corner of the map. And if you were to walk across that or make your way across that, you would end up at Tal'Dorei. Yes.
oh, okay. So it's that close.
Yep.
Interesting. What else can you tell me about the how the geography of this map and the continent kind of shapes the narrative?
It's big.
It's big. Yeah. It's Asia. It's like, don't get in a land war in Wildemount.
And that's part of the problem is people are really trying. So in a sort of if for a continent of this size, if you were to run a campaign here, chances are most of the campaign would take place within the continent. You probably wouldn't go too far afield or explore too many other continents. That's not to say you can't. It's just I would imagine a lot of Wildemount campaigns are very much Wildemount based, and that's good because Wildemount has a tremendous. It's big enough that there's a tremendous variety in terms of climates and terrain types. So but there are basically 4 main geographical regions. And Matt and his collaborators have been very good about painting them with different brushes so that they feel very different. And you can almost treat each of these regions as a complete campaign in and of itself.
Oh, okay.
So the first, sort of working from west to east, the first is the Menagerie Coast. And it's this sort of western, coastal, very green strip of Wildemount, where you've got these coastal cities, this sea trade, pirates, and all of that sort of action going on.
Is it fertile? So that's where a lot of agriculture would go there.
And because these coastal cities have been sort of landed on by people from all over the world, it's also very cosmopolitan. So places like Port Damali and Port Zune and what's the one that's giving me? Nicodranas. These places have a very diverse cultures sort of woven into their fabric of their cities.
So you'll see humans, lots of elves,
lots of
orcs,
everything. Lots of everything. There's sort of an organizing faction behind these coastal cities. They're all loosely allied or confederated and tied to this faction called the Clovis Concord. But what really the Clovis Concord is just the union of these cities. They're independent, but then there's almost like a NATO-like quality of mutual protection /
or like
trade.
The Greek city-states in our history of like
Exactly.
they banded together when they needed to, but
Yes.
not necessarily for
Yes.
individual.
Yeah. But if you like nautical campaigns or campaigns with pirates running around all over the place, then the Menagerie Coast is nirvana for you. There are all kinds of islands and archipelagos that you can visit. There's the pirate city of Darktow, which is on an island that you can go to, and you can meet the Plank King. Who doesn't want to meet the Plank King?
I love planks
Yes.
and kings,
Yes.
so put them together.
Yeah, so
That's cool.
Fascinating character. And then, so that sort of defines the western edge region.
And then there's a large mountain range.
Then that's naturally cut off by this large mountain range, the Sirios Mountains. And then you get to the heartland areas. And there are really kind of two. It's one area, but it's been sort of bifurcated. And it's known as Wynandir.
Wynandir.
Yeah, Wynandir. Wynandir.
Got it.
And there's Western Wynandir and there's Eastern Wynandir. And that's where our main conflict is happening between the Dwendalian Empire and the Kryn dynasty.
Ah, okay.
These are these two relatively young, emergent factions that have decided they cannot be good neighbors. And so one of the interesting things about this world and about the geography is that these two are sort of in like a bad marriage almost. They can't escape. They're trapped by mountains to the west of them and then another ring of mountains to the east of them, and their ideologies are incompatible so that now they're basically fighting over territory. So what you're seeing in this campaign, this part of the campaign, is the early stages of what could be a terrible, terrible war.
I see. And you said relatively young. Does that mean that they're, this rise to this much influence and power is new, or the actual settlements and cities are new?
In the span of the whole history of this continent, these two nations haven't been around very long.
Okay. So like
now
a generation or two, or longer than that?
A few generations.
Okay.
Yeah. So maybe it is long in the sense of a mortal lifespan. Yeah, they've been around longer than I have. They've been around longer than my great-great-grandfather has.
Well, I don't know. You've been here forever.
I've been here for a long time, at least 700 years. But, like the Dwendalian Empire was sort of born out of smaller conflicts, feudal conflicts, and then this one king sort of conquered this piece and conquered that piece and conquered that piece, destroyed the Julis Dominion over here, killed their leaders and took over that piece, and has now called himself emperor. And then at some point, his family members just started to inherit one after the other. Eventually, the empire kept its name, but the emperor started to call themselves kings instead. And not going to get into the details of that. But they've only been around for a handful of generations, trying to solidify their hold on the place. While next door to them, dark elves, driven out of the Underdark, have risen to the surface and staked a claim in what is currently known as Eastern Wenandir, and areas beyond that actually as well. And they, like the Dwendalian Empire, they're not inherently evil, and that's the key thing here. Is neither of these groups is like the good guy or the bad guy.
Yeah,
very morally gray on both sides. But their beliefs in the Luxon and the light is contrary to the traditional god beliefs of the Dwendalian Empire, and so on religious grounds, on territorial grounds, these two sides are fighting. But this area that forms the core of the continent is a very fertile area. There's lots of beautiful valleys. There's the Marrow Valley. There's the Zemni Fields. They've got lovely cities and settlements and stuff like that. Some of them ravaged by war, but others have not yet been devastated. Now, all of Wenandir, of course, was a battleground ages ago between the gods, and before that between the gods and the primordials. So in some respects, like the Forgotten Realms, you can see in Wenandir the ruins of the calamity that pretty much almost tore the world apart.
Oh, okay.
Ages ago.
So there are big, large ruins.
Yeah, big, large ruins, and just evidence of that sort of bygone destruction. And so,
have either of the empires or governments here have they been using that to their advantage, or they just kind of ignore those?
Right now, they're trying to find the edge over one another, and they're reaching out and exploring these places.
Which is why they need adventurers.
Yes. Which brings me to the third area I wanted to talk about, which is the Graying Wildlands to the north.
Okay.
And also the islands of Eiselcross.
Eiselcross.
Yes. Because ages ago, there was this Atlantean culture. I use Atlantean in the sense that possibly kind of futuristic by modern day standards, wondrous. They had technology that nobody really understood and could do remarkable things. Right. Flying cities, all that kinds of stuff. That fell to ruin, and Aor sort of crashed and burned. But in the remnants of in Eiselcross, you can find the remnants of this Aoran crash and Aorian relics, which is now driving a huge effort from both the dynasty and the empire to get them.
I see.
To use them in the war, even though they don't even understand what they do. They've heard that they exist, and so there's this kind of charge up into the northern islands, these frozen wastelands, to find these lost artifacts.
Because it's the only way they're going to get an edge that could potentially stop this.
Or at the very least, they can keep it out of the hands of their enemies.
Oh, right.
So that is, you can see the war kind of now spilling out to the outlying areas of the world. Now, the Graying Wildlands and the islands of Eiselcross are sort of an untamed frontier. There's not much in the way of settlements up here. The land is not really conducive to humanoid existence. You have to be pretty darn tough. There are wild folk tribes up there, and there are orcs, and there are other monstrous things up there, but very few cities and settlements. So once you get north of these peaks and into the Graying Wildlands, you're kind of on your own. There isn't what you'll find in Wenandir, like the settlement over the next hill. There isn't an easy escape from the ferocity of the monsters who live up here and just the harshness of the terrain.
And it looks like, based on the what I'm seeing here, that the actual there's like a river of lava. Is that what that is? Is that is there volcanic?
Yeah, so one of the weird things is there is volcanic activity up there, and there's also some magical effects. Consequence of ancient calamities that have happened there before and the collapse of the Aeolian culture. And so there's weird things like rivers of lava that seem to form out of nowhere or out of gates to the elemental plane of fire, things like that. That's where things really start to get weird up there. And in another place, in another part of the country, which I'm going to talk about next, with is Zorhas and Blightshore, which is the eastern part, where a lot of the ancient calamities that have been visited upon Wildemount have lingering magical effects.
I see.
That are terrible. Things like weird lightning storms and burning embers and noxious clouds of gas and interdimensional vortices swirling around. It's really kind of more like a post-apocalyptic quality.
Oh, okay. So what's the name of that mountain range?
So this mountain range here is called the Ashkeeper Peaks.
Ashkeeper Peaks. So on the
far
eastern side of that,
eastern side of the Ashkeeper Peaks, things get really dark and there's just dangerous, and there's just big swaths of blasted landscape, burnt, charred forests, twisted forests, vast mires of muck and sort of rot and decay, and then just weird sort of burning plains and acrid smoke in the air and all kinds of nasty business.
And those are all left over from these calamities that have occurred.
Yeah.
Was that true of the entire continent, and then over time these just have ended, but for some reason here that hasn't?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Wildemount, I think one way to describe it is a continent on the mend. And you could probably see it sort of mending its way west to east in a way. Things get a little more abnormal the farther east you get on the continent.
Yeah.
Until you get to Blightshore, where you start to see some of the really, really freaky phenomenon.
What is Blightshore? Sounds really terrible. What is that?
It's terrible.
Refer to?
So, well, they called its actual name is the Miscath Strand, but people call it Blightshore because it's just rotten. There's like big whirlpools in the water that can swallow ships whole. Ooh. So travel up and down the coast can be dangerous. There's mutated creatures that live there. There are structures like Gorvelish, which is this like the sort of necromancer's ruined castle in The Hobbit. It's this decayed, forgotten castle ruin with all these shadowy wyvern creatures called gloomstalkers prowling around it and feeding on anybody who gets too close to it, and dark secrets from a bygone age sort of locked away inside it. That's where you find all that kind of weird stuff from yesteryear. And
is there any association with any of the deities of at any of these places? I mean, what you're describing sounds very evil goddish to me.
Yeah, well, I think there's an effort here there's like dungeons and places you can go scattered throughout this region, and a lot of these dungeons can take you into places where you can find relics that the gods left behind or the betrayers' gods left behind.
I see.
There are these things called the arms of the betrayers, which are like these evil weapons that the betrayer gods fashioned.
Oh.
And they're sort of left and scattered throughout the world. So Blightshore would be an obvious place to drop a few of these things for players to find.
Mm. Well, that's a really good overview of everything that's going on in Wildemount, the entire continent.
Yeah.
It does seem very vast. As far as scale goes, what would you compare it to here in our world? Is it as big as Asia, or is it more of a...
Well, I do not off the top of my head know just how
I guess there's a scale on the bottom.
Yes, there is. So it's based in squares. So this thing here is, let's see, 200, 400, 600, 800, 1,000, 2, 4, 6, 8,000. It's 2,200 miles across.
Okay. So that's not...
So...
that's if you go from New York to LA, that's 3,000 miles. So it's
Yes.
about half the width according to this scale. A lot of space to explore, but it's not quite like the the expanse of
and because
Asia.
it's compartmentalized in the way it is, your campaign, if you were to run one, can sort of focus on one region to the exclusion of others, and you don't lose you can have a plenty robust campaign just within one of the areas I mentioned.
And we'll get to talking about that in the future, because I think there's
Yes.
also adventures in each of those regions.
There is, in the book Explorer's Guide to Wildemount, Matt and company wrote one adventure in each major region as a starting adventure for that region.
Yeah, so that
Yeah.
you can start your campaign there, and then you might not even leave that region by the end of it.
And if you just look at the adventures as a set, you get a pretty good sense of what Wildemount is all about and sort of its diverse character. That there are kind of like four different ways you can play Wildemount, or four different feels of campaign setting.
Yeah.
And these starter adventures kind of teach you what a campaign in the Menagerie Coast is versus a campaign in Zorhas versus a campaign in Eiselcross, for example.
I love that. I love that. Making it for it. So we are out of time. So let's. Where can people get in touch with you?
I am on Twitter at Chris Perkins DND.
Excellent. We'll have a lot more lore dropping for everything that's happening in Wildemount and things in the future. So thanks for joining me, and we'll talk about it all. March 17th is when Explorer's Guide to Wildemount will be in stores everywhere. Look for it then. Thanks very much.